Well, ladies and gentlemen, we do have an update on the current Alberta separation movement with this new poll. We knew there were going to be a number of polls that came out right after the Carney Liberal minority victory, and this is a more encouraging one. The polls that I have seen, it was anywhere from around 35 to 40%. This one says 45% of Albertans want to separate without a single leader, without a single movement, without a campaign budget. This is from a account. You can see Alberta separation. They're going to be definitely more on the side of separation, so they're going to try and frame it as positive. But I agree with this poll. This is pretty positive. The only negative thing you can say is that we anticipated an immediate uptick in terms of people wanting to separate. That could be lashing out against a Liberal winning again with how unpopular they were, just with the election fresh on everyone's mind. So maybe in a few months, the number might go back down. But it is overall, considering this is just kind of the beginning of this idea, 45% of Albertans wanting to leave, you would say that is at least relatively encouraging. Because you would think, well, especially if Trump got involved and maybe offered certain things to Albertans when it comes to the tax burden, when it comes to being more of a conservative, I guess they would be territory if they joined the United States. Even if they became independent, they'd be more conservative and they wouldn't have to deal with the Equalization Act and other things, including the liberal policies for climate, like the carbon tax. And they've said, well, they're going to pause their current carbon tax and they want to have more overall power in terms of the say when it comes to their resources regarding extraction, like the natural gas and oil that Alberta is very plentiful in. So the 45%, I would say, in terms of this poll is pretty encouraging. You can see slim majority of Albertans would stay in Canada, according to a new poll. It says, notably, a substantial portion of the population indicated their willingness to vote for independence from Canada if an independence referendum were to be held today. Survey revealed that around 45% of Albertans expressed their support for Alberta's independence from Canada and established as an independent nation. However, the survey did not ask about Alberta potentially becoming the 51st state. And the thought is that if it did ask that, if you're talking about 45%, it's hard to say an exact number, but my estimation would be probably about 30%, maybe 25% of them would vote to become the 51st state out of those 45%, which is why I originally said, well, it would be ideal for Trump if he wanted Alberta specifically. This is something that Trump has not talked about. He was just on a huge trip to the Middle East and visiting several very rich oil countries there. So there's been really no dialogue in terms of not even Greenland or Alberta. This is something that would have to come up to where maybe Trump gets wind of it. And we know based off of Trump and his aggressiveness in terms of Canada, even talking to Carney about possibly acquiring Canada and Carney trying to play this tough guy to where it's saying it's not for sale, you would think Trump would realize and be advised that Alberta would be a much more enticing opportunity considering the makeup of the country with more conservatives. If they became a state, they potentially would be conservative. Now we can debate that, but I think even if they were a swing state, the amount of resources they have makes them well worth it. All of Canada, I can understand not being worth it because of how liberal it is, and it would be extremely hard for conservatives to win general elections. That's why I've said Trump saying all of this, people saying it's a troll, it's not a troll, whatever it is, it's not smart as a conservative, if you're a Republican, to want all of Canada. But Alberta, because of the natural resources, makes a lot of sense. And you're also increasing footing more north towards the Arctic, which is something Trump really wants, which is why we've also talked about maybe taking all of Western Canada, which would include the 3 territories, which would give you full access of the Northwest Passage. But when it comes to something like this, I would say out of the 45%, probably 25% you would get in a poll, a straw poll like this, that would be willing to become American citizens. That's before a potential enticement package that could be revealed by Trump and shown to Albertans to where their tax burden goes way down. They potentially get more money, kind of like what we're doing with Greenland, to where there's this bribing aspect of it to where we could just give the citizens money to buy their territory. But with Alberta, it's even more next level, because if we were to acquire Alberta, it would be because of their citizens wanting to join the United States, at least at around a 50% rate. And if they were at around a 50% rate in terms of joining the United States, they'd probably be at 60 to 65, 70% in terms of leaving Canada. They're only at 45% right now. But like that tweet said, this is before a movement is really mobilized It's just the birthplace of it. But I can see it being a positive and a negative because this is very fresh on everyone's minds. A lot of this will depend on Carney's early leadership when it comes to how liberal is he. We know the connection, especially the rumors that have come out to where China dumped big money into the Canadian election to help the liberals remain in power. And so that's another thing to take into account. Now, Pierre Poilievre, who is still very popular among the conservative base in Canada, said in a press conference about a week ago that he was against Alberta separation. Of course, he still wants to gain power within Canada and be their leader. And with the way their elections work, technically there could be another election within a year or two. But it makes sense. Certainly, there are conservative Canadians that say, no, we're turning the country. If you look at the demographics, you look at the polls, all of the younger people are conservative. It's the boomers that are holding the country back from being more conservative, and it's all relative. It's conservative in a Canadian sense. That doesn't necessarily mean it's American conservative, but still, it would be more right-wing, especially with the young people shifting to the right. So there are conservatives within Canada that are saying, no, we don't want to lose Alberta. We think we can turn this country back right-wing. The problem is the population in Canada relative to their land is so small. They're talking about taking in a bunch of immigrants. If that happened, I mean, they've already taken in a bunch of Indians, and they thought that was really going to change their tech space, and it's done nothing except just clog the country and make their big cities total cesspools to where they are just overcrowded, overpopulated, and they're really losing their culture in a lot of the major cities in Canada. And that's with, by the way, the population still being extremely down relative to the amount of land that Canada is. Now, you could say, well, a lot of it is uninhabitable, especially within the territories, but their population density is very, very bad. And that's why they're talking about doubling their population within the next, 70 years, which is a very scary thing. So, and by the way, doubling the population, it's not through increasing the birth rate. We know that. So the 45% possibly of Albertans, I do think it's encouraging, but we'll have to see how this develops because I could see this working out a number of different ways. It could gain steam as the movement gets established, and then maybe it becomes 50 to 55%, or because it's not on the front of everyone's minds and people say no, it'd be too hard to do it. You're talking about possibly, I mean, if Alberta leaves, there are certain things within Alberta that the Canadian government, that Ottawa would want access to, or they would want Alberta to give up, because there are certain infrastructure things that are set up in Alberta that the government would say that that's ours and we want access to that. So it's a little bit more complicated than saying, well, this is our province, these are the borders of our province, and we want to secede, and if we secede, we will be taking all of this land. You could argue that Canada potentially would want some of the land. Whether or not that would be a feasible thing to work out, I mean, that's what negotiations are. The idea is there's a referendum. If the referendum comes back 60 to 65%, you look at where is Trump on the topic. Is there American support? Does Trump recognize Alberta as being independent from Canada? You would think that would be a home run decision by Trump, because that would be supporting the citizens of Alberta in their decision if it is 60 to 65%. So that would be something that I think Trump 1000% would do. That puts more pressure on Ottawa, on the Canadian government, because now there's U.S. support for an independent Alberta. Is the government really going to go against that? But then it becomes a negotiation between the government and Alberta. And it's talking about Alberta developing their own government, developing their own laws. It's probably a lot of carryover from Canada, but I'm sure there would be some different things when it comes to that, because you would have to make different laws if you are your own country, which right now we're operating under the idea that they want to be independent, but they don't want to join the United States, at least not right off the bat. If they did join the United States, they would join and immediately be a territory and probably apply for statehood, although there are benefits to being a territory and not being a state. But I would imagine they would probably want to be a state. Personally, I would be fine with keeping them as a territory, just because of their location, the territorial expansion, not adding more people to kind of water down the voter base. Although you could say, well, they're conservative, we'll definitely take them. You want the 2 senators, you want the 1 governor, but that's something that, because it is Canada, and Canada's just in general a lot more left than the United States, you could say, well, they also are possibly more like a Minnesota, to where they are liberal. But I've heard Saskatchewan would be more like Minnesota or Manitoba, with Alberta being more conservative. But and then that's another thing. Would Saskatchewan want to join? Now you're talking about the western part of Canada maybe becoming part of the United States, and then that gives Trump his Arctic empire with the potential of adding Greenland, the three territories, already having Alaska, and now you've got so many waterways that are under total U.S. control within the Arctic. But that seems extremely unlikely. I think Alberta leaving, they're talking about a referendum, the timeline on it possibly having a one by October, maybe within the next 7 or 8 months. Some people say it's going to happen within a year. These are all loose estimates, but the timeline, it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow. But this is just a vote without any mobilization of propaganda, which you can take a number of, or excuse me, this is not a vote, it's a poll. You can take it a number of different ways. You can interpret it however you'd like, but I would say 45%, that's the highest number I've seen when it comes to all of the Albertans combined willingness to leave. You can see this is how it was worded. If a vote were held today on whether Alberta should leave Canada and become an independent country, how would you cast your vote? Alberta should leave Canada and become independent. Alberta should remain a part of Canada. 55 to 45, Alberta remaining plus 10 at 55%. Edmonton residents overwhelmingly voted in favor of remaining in the province, while Calgary residents showed the same split as the overall results. And you can see this is by city. Edmonton, Calgary, and the rest of Alberta. The rest of Alberta, outside of those two big cities, 52% say they should leave. Calgary mirrors the overall results, and Edmonton is at 61% staying within Canada. You can see, what is this? Notably, 70% of federal conservative voters support independence. 70% of the conservatives say they want to be independent. This is conservatives within Alberta. 70% say they want independence. 2% of liberals want independence. Wow. And then you've also got gender playing a role, of course. You've got 52% of males saying they want independence, only 38% of females. That doesn't surprise me at all. 45 to 48%. Is this a different poll, or is this the same one? Oh, this is from 2020. Yeah, that's a poll from 2020, so that's a much outdated poll. I don't know why they would show us that. But that's interesting that poll has higher support. 45 to, I mean, it's basically the same support, but either way, we will have to see what happens. Interesting data here on Albertans and the men, higher propensity to wanting to leave than the women because they're more conservative on average. But we'll have to see. This is encouraging, I would say, overall, 45%, but a lot of it depends on a number of things, including the referendum happening. When is it going to take place? What is the future of Alberta if they do this? They need to have a full action plan on step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 to actually present it to the people so they know if we vote to be independent, we're not going to be left in the dark as a singular, small, powerless new country. We need to have an immediate support system through the United States, through Donald Trump, that will make Albertans more willing to leave Canada rather than be, and we know it's a conservative liberal split there. The conservatives are more so going to want to leave than the liberals. That's why you look at Edmonton, they're going to say no. But either way, guys, that is just the update. Make sure you like this video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.